welcome back to the show. We are delighted to interview Ernie Graham, chairman of Homebot. Say hello, Ernie.
Hello.
Ernie is a highly accomplished entrepreneur and business leader with a proven track record of success in the industry, in particular the tech industry. His experience and expertise make him a valuable resource for other entrepreneurs and a driving force behind the growth of the companies he leads. I'll tell you a little bit more about Homebot, but again, welcome and thank you, Ernie, for being on.
You bet. Great to be here.
For those who aren't familiar with Homebot, Homebot is a client engagement and retention portal that maximizes repeat and referral business for lenders and real estate agents by empowering consumers to build wealth through home ownership. Did I get that right? I miss anything?
Yeah.
You can read a lot about the exit of the organization, but like any good book, there's a great story attached to it. And Pat, I know you had seen this story develop firsthand.
Yeah, exactly. Quick intro, because I had a lot of great stuff with Ernie and I'm excited to hear it directly from him. But Ernie and I go way back and initially met as friends, I don't know, probably approaching 16, 17 years or so. Kind of learned about him and his entrepreneurial acumen, et cetera. Went through some tough times in life, which he'll get into. Personally, overcame a lot of things. His story is amazing because it's one of those, there was a point where he was literally crashing out on people's couches and what have you, buddies, and went through divorce and had some other businesses that were setbacks and kept going. And I watched this from not only a friendship level, but then we also had a business connection and had a lot of synergies. I watched it from the ground up. It's truly remarkable. It's kind of Shark Tank times 10. And you're seeing Homebot more and more. All of us that we get these updates from our realtors, our lenders saying, now that's just the very, very beginning, but it's really cool and an honor for me to have seen Ernie do what he did. He's a heck of a good guy. Without further ado, let's dive in here.
Yeah, let's dive right into the juice. Ernie, do you mind opening up with just how you got started, right? And you don't necessarily have to go through the entire resume, although it's extremely impressive. What I'm more curious about is where did you start? How did that evolve into the next venture? And then eventually you went from being a W-2 employee to saying, you know what, I'm going to do this thing on my own and starting your own businesses. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, I was thinking about it this morning. I was like, I want to talk about how far to go back. So my grandfather was a 30-year IBM. My father was a 30-year IBM. So I woke up every morning with my dad, putting on the crisp white shirt, looking for the dark socks that matched, wearing a three-piece suit, like very regimented corporate life. So that was my DNA. My parents got divorced. My mom dated this guy who was an entrepreneur. And I just remember going, wow, that guy is so happy. He's always going to make one cash. And he's always buying stuff. And it's like, I want to be an entrepreneur. No, actually, I do think there was something to that, just being exposed to another entrepreneur. And it kind of put this seed inside of me that I didn't even think about it at the time. I was like, oh, he's a cool guy. And as life went on and I went to school and engineering, and coming out of school, I went right into the corporate life, just the way my dad and my grandfather were corporate. And somewhere along the line, I got the sales bug, right? I was like going, I want to sell. And then I ended up working for a company out of Silicon Valley where I'm selling. And this is actually, selling is a really, I think, important theme, at least in my journey.
Yeah.
I cared so much about the product. And then I was like, with like the stuff that I was configuring as an engineer. And I think that sort of my journey was kind of really started around, it's like when I sort of bridged over from being an engineer to selling technology. And then I was like, really got into technology and said, oh, wow, there's the selling side. It's not just the making, the building side.
Yeah. Now, were you always a gregarious, outgoing guy, as I know you to be? That's essentially who I think that's in your DNA. I mean, when you put engineer and outgoing in the same bucket, they usually don't exist, right? I mean,
yeah. So the short answer is yes. I've always been very gesticular. I've always had jazz. I was born with jazz. But when you ask me that question, it reminds me. So when I took my first job, actually working not for a big tech company out of Silicon Valley, I'll never forget making it to the final interview. It's like the area manager. He goes, Ernie. He goes, and I was applying for an engineering job. I basically was a sales engineer, so I was supporting a salesperson. I'll never forget him staring me down. He said, Ernie, he said, the job is yours under one circumstance. I said, what is it? He goes, you don't come in here a year from now, knocking on my door, telling me you want to be a sales guy. Because I see your dad's.
He had you pegged.
And I looked at him. I said, sir, I'm an engineer in my heart. This is what I do.
Right.
This is what I crave. This is what I am. I go, so I can very comfortably make that commitment to you. 6 months later, hey, I can do the sales thing.
Technically, it wasn't a year later, right? You're 6 months later, so you are a man of your word.
And what he did is he said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll let you go into sales, but you get the crappiest territory, the crappiest clients, and you don't get any support. So get out.
What was that territory? You remember?
Northwest Arkansas.
Okay.
And it had been formerly a Walmart account. Walmart had kicked us out. It had come from millions a year to nothing per year. And he goes, get in there, figure it out. But yeah, I think that I've always kind of had this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that sort of my story as it relates to getting to the Homebot stage.
Yeah.
I was always a technologist. I got involved in a startup that famously went up and blew up. And I wasn't a founder of that startup in the 90s. Remember the whole .bomb thing? I got to see it from a side. I tried to write a book about it because it was so crazy. People went to jail with our company.
You did write a book, or you could?
I tried to.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this book writing stuff is hard. It's crazy. I was like in the middle of
yeah, heck of a story, Ernie.
crazy. But I think the result of that .bomb is I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time. And I ended up so burned out. And me and my family decided to move to Telluride. So we go to Telluride, and it's a 1-year sabbatical. We go there at the end of 2000, beginning of 2001. And so we're there. I've just come out of this .bomb thing, right? And all of a sudden, a year later, it's like, okay, it's time to move back to civilization away from Telluride.
Yeah.
And 9/11 hit. And so I think a big part of my story is like 9/11 hit. I called my realtor and I said, dude, I'm going to have to get a job. What should I do? And he goes, oh, you should get in real estate. And I went, oh, come on. I'm not going to get real estate. I'm a technologist. I was just part of this IPO,
right?
Whatever. I'm not going to do that. And he looks at me. I'll never forget. He took a pause, big, long, dramatic pause. And he goes, you can either be in real estate or you can be a lifting and help people get in their lift chairs during the winter time. I went, what? And he goes, yeah, man, you're in a resort economy. Everything can be done.
Right.
So ultimately, the necessity of that moment, because I was running out of money, I was like, geez, I gotta get into real estate. So I got my license. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, I'm a real estate guy.
And that was Telluride 360?
It was.
Yeah.
So I started my own brokerage. And actually, that was where I really kind of got into the entrepreneurial thing. Where I was like, geez, I don't want to go work for somebody.
Right.
I'm just going to start my own brokerage. So I started a brokerage. And then 10 years later, I ended up coming back to the technology world. Yeah. Sort of reincarnated as a real estate tech. And that was really sort of the foundation for Homebot, or for the next startup and then Homebot.
Do you think it was when you were Telluride 360, you saw some flaws or holes or things that you could correct? And did your engineering mind take over to say, gosh, I would do X, Y, and Z in order to make said process or whatever more efficient?
100%.
Okay.
And I think it was interesting too, because I remember feeling pretty snobbish about the whole thing. I'm like, oh my God, this real estate industry is so broken. It's so broken. And this needs to be fixed and this needs to be fixed. And so I did use my tech stuff to hire people and to do interesting things to be able to build a great business using technology. Yeah. But I definitely remember though, just thinking to myself, I'm in professional jail. I'm in real estate. How do I get out of it?
So let me jump in on that. That's interesting. Talk a little bit more on that. What were the issues you perceived? What did you not like? What did you want to improve about real estate in general?
I think first of all, it's just a lack of transparency. That there was all this data that was laying around. And I was like, oh man, let's make this data available to the consumer. And so for me, that was like a great opportunity to sort of carve out my niche. But ultimately, that whole story was about necessity. Yeah. I needed to put food on the table. I had a year of money. I had run out of money. And now I didn't have any choice. Yeah. I was in this little resort town. I needed to get into real estate. And so for me, I think that, Pat, there were some really interesting parts about how I could make data available to clients and do all that kind of cool stuff. But I think ultimately, when I look back on that at the time, I was just like, oh man, I'm a technologist. What am I doing? What am I doing? I'm a technologist. I'm not a real estate guy. And now I look back on that. And when I think about the last 10 years of my life, and all I can think about is how grateful I am for getting the dirt under my fingertips of an industry. And as a technologist, I don't know that I would have necessarily ever afforded myself or been afforded the opportunity to go really deep, doing open houses, doing just all the crappiest work of an industry.
Yeah.
It could be anything, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I now look back on that and I just remember the time I certainly did not appreciate what's happening at the time. But
Well, listen,
I know it was magic.
A lot of that dredge work, I think that you're talking about, and this is going to get really interesting when we get there. A lot of that dredge work is sort of gave you the grassroots acumen and experience, we imagine, for when you began to kind of transition to real estate fintech. And the other thing that I'll say that I know that world was very helpful for you is the deal world, right? And in your particular instance, raising VC money, your exit, we'll get there. But real estate and everything that goes into that and the psychology that I'm sure was invaluable as well. Another kind of piece of your arsenal.
No doubt. I think the old school terminology was you start sweeping the floors at a company. Right?
Yep. Yeah.
You end up CEO.
Right.
But it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You sweep the floors, you see at a really granular level how everything works.
Yeah.
But I just remember absolutely having very little appreciation for what was happening at the time. Don't feel sorry for me. I was making great money as a realtor and as an owner of a brokerage,
right,
jazz, but I had a yearning to get back to tech. And then when I did come back to tech, the Great Recession actually gave me the opportunity to jettison. And then I realized that I had been reincarnated from a tech guy to a real estate tech guy. And I actually had really granular understandings of the industry. And now I had an outlet for my tech.
Now, how did you make that transition? One, going back to the industry as a whole, that's an industry that needed to be disrupted, right? Yeah. And so as you're doing the job, rolling up your sleeves, you're noticing a number of issues that perhaps you can resolve via technology, right? What was the first concept or idea that you were going to run with that you transitioned out of the brokerage side and right into your own tech company?
Yeah, it was called Hyperlink. And it was, I did actually, coming out of Telluride during the Great Recession, I was literally right on the verge of bankruptcy personally. I was so invested. I wasn't just a realtor. I got invested in these deals and all this kind of jazz. And so when I moved to Denver and I had this idea for tagging images and having deep information. When you go to an automobile website, you can click on the car and it'll show you, oh, this is this type of system,
right?
This type of shock absorber,
whatever
it is with the little dots on the screen. So I'd come up with that. And I remember for me, it was a lot of money because I didn't have any money at the time. And in that first idea, I just remember having this moment where I'm like going, this ain't going to work. And so the very first idea coming out of it, I ended up having to pull the plug on it. But I also remember that time, because around the time I met Pat, I remember thinking about my wife at the time was saying, get a job. And I'm applying to all these jobs in Denver and I can't even get an interview.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it dawns on me. In Telluride, I became an entrepreneur, meaning that I'm unemployable now. I'm literally unemployable. I'm an entrepreneur. And I'd never thought that it would be such a liability. But at the same time, I was like, shoot, I'm unemployable, which means I get the lease, if you will, to pursue my entrepreneurial ambition.
Yeah.
I'll never forget my former wife saying, I can't get a job. No one will call me back. So after that idea, I was like, okay, what's the next idea?
Right.
And there's no money, and it's really teetering on bankruptcy.
So I want to ask you a little bit more about that. I want to make the transition to kind of the impetus for Homebot. And I know there were a few things prior to that were related, but ultimately that was your, let's just call it your mega success, right? But one thing I know about Ernie, and I represent entrepreneurs largely for a living, and one of the things that makes Ernie very successful is, I've seen it, when a project, idea, business is not going to work and you just hit on it. You go, this ain't going to work. Talk a little bit about the ability to shift gears and to know, we hear in the entrepreneurial culture, you just go, you never quit. That's there's some truth to that and there's some falsity to that. And you're very good at knowing when it's met its end and pivoting. So talk a little bit about that and your philosophy on that.
It's such a huge question. I actually think a lot about this on the regular too. And the first thing I would say to that is it wasn't always that way. And I remember in Telluride, I had this big monster project on the mountain, huge multi-$100 million deal. And I had 2 years of my life invested into it, but it was killing my income because it was an on-the-come deal.
Yeah.
And I won't bore you with all the details, but in the aftermath of all that, when I looked back and I said, what were the decisions that I could have made differently? I looked at that deal. It's called Silver Line. It was such a good project. I was going to be rich with all the commissions. And I already pre-sold tens of millions, 20, 50, $100 million worth of product.
Yeah.
The point is that I forgot the concept of sunk cost through all that. I'd gotten so riled up, so invested. My entrepreneurial spirit had run amok.
Yeah.
I was so into it. And I think that, Pat, this is one of the things as an entrepreneur. It's like we run through walls. We jump over the walls. We do whatever it takes to win, and we close the deal at all costs. We do it. And for me, I had learned a big lesson, but through just a terrible ordeal, where this thing actually, my commitment to it actually allowed me to really fall on the doorstep of bankruptcy. And the reason, and when I look back on it, I said, what should I have done differently? I should have said, you know what? It doesn't matter if this deal can one day be crazy good. It's not right for me now. Read the tea leaves, walk away. And I should have walked away.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing.
And so I guess the answer to your question is, I think for most entrepreneurs, you have to have a grand bloodletting in your life to really learn that lesson of some cost. And so I had that now. I wear that on my sleeve, and I think about.
Yeah.
And so when I dropped when I said, "Hey, this isn't going to work," or right, the ability to walk away from a deal, even though you've put so much into it, which is absolutely against the grain of the entrepreneurial spirit. I get it.
Yeah.
But you got to be able to reach deep and go. I think another thing as a sales guy, I developed a particular set of Liam Neeson skills to close deals. The other thing I learned on a more micro basis is that there were deals that weren't supposed to be closed. And I'll tell you, you guys know this too. You close a deal that's not supposed to be closed, and then the universe will snatch it. You don't know when, but the universe will snatch that back eventually. And again, I think the way to learn, I don't think anybody's going to learn how to do that on a podcast today, but I think creating awareness around sunk costs and like making that part of your daily practice to always assess your environment and what is the net present value today? Yeah. And then say, is it negative? Walk. If it's positive, maybe you stay. Right. But just the awareness around that has served me very well.
That's a good point. I was on the sales aspect, right? In sales, at least early on, you were taught close the deal, do whatever you can to close the deal. And at least for me too, right? Because sales and marketing is my background. There's a point in my career that I learned, no, you walk away from certain deals that don't make sense, right? Whether it's the client that you know is going to be miserable to the service team or someone that maybe it doesn't align with your best practices. And that is really hard to do and takes a lot of, not just intelligence, but it takes a lot of forward thinking to say, these are the things that could go wrong. So I think that's a really good point. It's like you knew when to say at some point in your career, hey, I'm learning from the past, and this is how I'm applying it to the future here.
I think as you were talking now, I just started thinking about how you actually get there as an entrepreneur. I think it's honesty. Yeah. So when you reflect on the past, and you got to think about what customers or what partners were not better off because of my deal. Right. And be honest with yourself about that. Yeah. I think what you'll find is that your history is littered with suboptimal outcomes, and just owning that and understanding that for me has become a source of great strength to be able to walk.
How many entrepreneurs do you think are truly good at admitting their faults?
Not many, because it's such a lonely, scary world out there. And we're all taught that, especially raising money and all this other stuff. It's like there's people out there that do not have your interests at heart, and we protect ourselves, and we're We fake it till we make it. We're
Yeah.
puffing out. We're trying to look bigger than we are. Do all these things to get to the next level. And it's very sort of counterintuitive to the protectionism that we're in, that mode that we're in.
Yeah.
But it is, coming back to your question, Pat, it has been one of the most powerful things that I've done as an entrepreneur is know when to say no.
So there is so much great stuff on this point that I want to get into on the deal side of things, because as you're kind of in the deal business and knowing when to walk away, it's very hard to walk away, et cetera. Amazing lessons that can be learned from Ernie on that front. But I want to, before we get there, let's dive a little bit into kind of the genesis of Homebot, right? So you had a couple of these entrepreneurial experiences. They went okay, et cetera, all kind of in fintech. Take us through kind of what you saw in Homebot, how you built it, and kind of give us the history there.
The story of Homebot actually started with a startup that I founded called Social Bios. And I had found a couple engineers and hired a couple engineers. We started it, and then we sold it really soon. We sold it to realtor.com. And then we went to work at realtor.com.
That was just over a year, right? That you had that business?
Literally from creation to sale was 14 months. Which, by the way, I'll just say this. If you don't have an idea as an entrepreneur that you're willing to commit to for 5 years, you're not going to create much value in 14 months. And I didn't create much value, but what I did do is I made myself employable at the time.
Yeah.
And that was the startup that got me a job at realtor.com. And it wasn't, again, necessity. I had alimony payments because now my wife divorced me and all of that journey and everything. And I needed to make payments. So I got a job. It was really important. And again, I felt like I was a professional jail.
Yeah.
But the necessity of that moment, I leaned into that and learned so much at realtor.com about the industry. And so basically what was happening was I realized that homeowners were underserved, that the industry was really focused at the bottom of the funnel, the buyers, and all the technology was really focused on buyers. I felt like homeowners were underserved. So that was sort of the product genesis of it, that I wanted to do right by homeowners to help them understand. And so that's where one of the guys that I had worked with, Social Bios, he and I put it together and started Homebot. But it was kind of crazy at the time just because I had a lot of financial obligations and whatever, but it was my dream to finally get back to a place to do a startup and go along with it.
Yeah. And that's the key from what you learned, right? You didn't want to get that short-term gain. You were in it for the long run. How's the stomach at this point? It's a roller coaster, right? Of emotion, personally, professionally. I'm sure there are ups and downs, but describe how you were feeling through this journey up until Homebot.
I think that for me anyway, and I think this is really important, is like adversity. And I would never wish it on anybody. But I went to the top of the mountaintop. I went to Telluride, and I fell back down. In Telluride, I went to the top of the mountaintop, and then I fell back down. And I started to climb up, and then I ended up working at a job. And so for all of the summits, if you will, there was some, I call it kissing the drain at the deep end. And I really think that having the adversity, building sort of just a good frame of reference. So how was my stomach at the time?
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. You get into, for me, it almost get into this state of everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay.
Right.
I got to chase my dreams. There's no other way. Everything's going to be okay.
Right.
Look, if these things didn't kill me pursuing this next thing sure as heck isn't going to kill me.
Right.
Running out of money and hiring a bankruptcy attorney and going all that through that stuff.
Right.
I never did declare, but I probably should have because I had so much debt and it was just so bad.
Yeah.
But that in combination, I remember I had a yogi at one point, and I was going to yoga, and I remember him saying something that stuck in my head. I remember he goes, when you're on your mat, you're sweating, muscles are breaking down, you can't do the pose, and you're just miserable. You're at the bottom, like, right, you're kissing. For me, it's like kissing.
Yeah.
He goes, can you be happy to just be alive?
So good.
Can you just can you capture that moment? And so what I have found is that if you can embrace like the bottom of the barrel.
The suck, right?
Yeah. You go, oh my God, the suck this is where I learned. This is where if you really figure out how to manage through that and learn from that, Like, so you're asking me about my stomach. Actually, even though I didn't have any money in the bank or whatever, I was like,
but you were used to it.
Yeah.
Right. Like your career was, it sounds like the training ground of, like you said, the highs are high and the lows are low, but you stayed consistent. And I'm sure you're the same person when you were on top of the mountain as you were at the bottom, right?
I was. And I think the other thing too, that I always told myself, I said, you know what, I'm not putting my life on hold. To live my life and to be kind to people and to have fun and to do all that until I'm at the top of the mountaintop. So that is interesting. That's another thing I decided to do.
That's a good question. As it relates to fun, right? Would you only allow yourself to have fun when you were at the top of the mountain, or as you're climbing, were you able to interact with friends, go out, whatever it is, whatever your definition of fun is, were you able to do that while you were building?
100% yes. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Again, one of the experiences that I had, I remember in Telluride, the Great Recession, is I had some clients from Lehman Brothers. And these guys would brag about missing their kids' birthdays and Christmases. And these guys worked so hard and they had it all tied up in Lehman, right? And then all of a sudden, bam, it just went. I remember just like going, whoa, that sucks. And that really galvanized me.
Yeah.
To say, you know what? I may have to spend extra time on Expedia to find a better hotel or the cheaper hotel. But by gosh, I'm going to Cabo. And I'm so happy for that too, because things are going to go up, but making sure that you keep yourself happy. You got to live your life.
I want to jump in on that a little bit because, again, going back to our friendship, and I've come across a number of people in business, clients I've represented or whatever. There's that, woohoo, we're going to make $1 billion. Those kind of folks are a dime a dozen, right? And when you get into the heart of things, what you realize is a lot of these folks can't execute. They've got stuff going on. They can't overcome the life issues. And one thing I've really admired about Ernie, and I would never have this to the same extent. This is why you had a life-changing event that I may never have, right? Is you have, I think, always embraced the idea of, hey, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen to me? You just said it. I could go bankrupt and take the benefit of all the bankruptcy laws and start over, but I'm healthy and I'm able to sell. You have a background in engineering. You understand technology. You were always incredibly optimistic through some really challenging times. Personally, I can remember a story. Ernie owed $2,500 to American Express when everything had sort of gone south at the same time. And I was helping him kind of informally.
I think it was terrible. And we worked it down to 20.
We might have worked it, exactly. So I remember I'm making phone calls kind of on the side for him and talking to customer service reps at American Express. And they has to go up 17 different layers. And they come back and go, all right, we'll cut a deal for $5,300. I'm like, dude, take the deal at $5,300. My God, take the deal. And he goes, no. Just tell him I'll go be. He was fearless. And at the time, I admired it. He was sort of down and out, and he's always appreciated what a dollar is. But you've always had fun. Concerts. I really admired that about you because a lot of people don't have that mindset. I think it's really important. And from what I see, Ernie Graham is that package and family oriented and did all the right things. So it's good to hear that life, even when you're going through these travails, building a company, wasn't all about work. You're very exemplary in that way.
Yeah. And I think just to clarify too, is like, I wasn't like running it from debt.
Right. No,
absolutely not.
Yeah. You weren't on yachts or anything at the time, eating caviar and hitting golf balls off the side, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So those are definitely interesting times. And I'll share with you right now. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm going to share with you my shame. My shame wasn't all that stuff of failed businesses or not management money. My shame for the last decade or 8 years of my life, 6 years, was that I started a company called Homebot, and I helped homeowners build wealth for themselves. And this thing took off, and lots of homeowners and now buyers use this thing. But throughout that entire journey, Mr. Homebot didn't own a home. I couldn't even afford a home. I was helping with my kids' education and that sort of thing. I own a home now.
Yeah.
But I just remember that was the only thing that I was ashamed of.
Yeah.
Actually, part of that, I was living in Pat's basement for a while. He saw the dark side of it.
True.
The dark side, when my current wife met me, I was literally homeless. I was living on I was not living on a car. I was living in hotels and that sort of thing. But you know what? It was just like, I got a job and I'm paying my bills. And so
you're doing what you love.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's incredible. That's incredible. It's also, again, very forward thinking that you were able to stop and smell the roses along the way. The Lehman example you gave, I looked at my father, and my dad was alive. I had this conversation with him. I said, this is many years ago. And I said, Dad, I feel like companies have shifted. They used to be extremely loyal to the employee, and the employee was very loyal back to the company. And there was times you might work 20 some odd years for the same company. And I think at some point there was a transition, right? Where employees were free agents and employers treated them as free agents, like total business, right? And some people would get too ingrained in the day-to-day and forget about the little things, right? Or not make time for their kid's soccer game because they were quote unquote busy, or there was always something. So again, with the stresses you've had, right, along the way, being true to yourself and being able to stay on course and focus on what's important to you is impressive.
I appreciate that. I think you're right too about the sort of old school and new school transition that's happened in the last sort of years. And I mentor some young people. Actually, that's been one of the great unexpected joys of Homebot. It's my opportunity to coach and mentor young people. And I always like to tell them a couple of things. I say, hey, if you don't value yourself, why in the world would I? And I think that the old world was that you expected the machine and the boss and the company to value you, right? To tell you what you're worth.
Right.
And now it's incumbent on us as individuals to know what we're worth.
Yeah.
And I think that's a new responsibility that everybody has. But then there's the dark side of that is like if you overestimate what you're worth, right?
Right.
We see it all the time. That's where you get in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not saying don't fake it till you make it.
Right.
But where you get a little bit too much confidence.
Right. Don't get over your skis too much, right?
That's right. And you don't have the humility to, I call it, crawl through the Shawshank Tunnel. That's where you get in trouble. But the point is that now individuals have responsibility for knowing what their worth is. And now with the economy, now you can find out where you should fit into the economy, where it unlocks that value, which is a complete flip the way it used to be, right?
Yeah.
The big machine.
Absolutely. When did you start mentoring? Was it when you transitioned from founder CEO to the board? Or
I think that as CEO of Homebot, it was sort of a regular part of the diet at the company. And I would talk to employees all the time. And I think particularly over the last year, 14 months, I've had more time to mentor some other CEOs and to mentor former employees of Homebot in their next gig and whatever. And I get a lot of joy out of it, but I also kind of feel like that it's my responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like you got to get on these podcasts. You have to share what's up.
Right.
So it's been a long
time. And sorry, Pat, before I have you jump in there, have you always been that way, or did it take some moments along the journey that you said, like for instance, did you have someone who mentored you? And if you didn't, was that also kind of part of your drive to help mentor those because you didn't have a mentor? Or conversely, you had a good mentor and you wanted to pass it on?
Great. I think about this all the time too. I think I had a couple of mentors that I didn't really think of as mentors.
Yeah.
And one of them was just this hard-ass guy that just brutalized me, just like just hardcore lessons. And I think about him often.
Yeah.
So I was mentored, but differently. And so for me, I think that the urge to mentor is really driven by my failures and say, oh my gosh, when you fail and you can't put that failure into context of how you're going to be successful in life, you get really sad and lonely. And then you start to puff out and you do all these things, unproductive things. I have a lot of confidence in my failures now. A, that I can talk about it.
Yeah.
B, I can actually think, oh, here's the result of that failure.
Yeah.
And I want to help people say, okay, you still need to fail, but maybe you don't have to fail as many times as I did. Maybe you can skip 2 or 3 of those failures.
And wearing it as a badge of honor versus something that you should be ashamed of, right? I think that's the other transition.
Let's transition into Homebot because there's some great stuff here. And everything that you kind of talked about and leading up to this, I know you went through with the Homebot experience. One of the things that to tell you kind of, again, having the benefit of the perspective is being friends first, but
that's the code for he's at a ringside seat.
Having a ringside seat.
He is the
right.
fascination with the abomination of mankind.
That's right. Personally and professionally, one of the things that to put some context on this, when you saw whatever it is you saw in Homebot, right? I remember you going, "Hey, I want to sit down and let's go to Starbucks and I want to just ask you, like, if there was this app, man, and you could see and you got notified and it said your house is worth this," and I'm like sitting there going, "Well, I call a mortgage company and I can always figure out if I want to refinance my house." And I remember at the time, this is when social media was kind of on the precipice of, you had LinkedIn and these things, and we didn't really know what it was, and reviews. And you were very big, even in giving me advice on the businesses I was building. Like, you have to have these testimonials. And I didn't really totally buy it. I think we all do now, but you were a sort of a visionary on that kind of stuff. And I remember having these grassroots conversations. Take us into that. And Homebot basically happened pretty quick from beginning to end. Take us sort of from the beginning to what made it work, where it almost didn't work. I know you had some great guys that helped you scale the business and do what you needed to do. Let's get into that.
The first thing I want to say, again, I don't think I've ever even shared this before, but there are so many visionaries. There's, hey, I created MySpace. Didn't you create MySpace? You had Facebook, right?
Right.
And I did this thing when I was at realtor.com, when I was like saying, okay, I'm going to do something after realtor.com. What's going to be? I remember doing this one day. I don't know what actually caused me to think about it, other than I was like, what's going to be my next gig? The next gig. What's my next gig after realtor.com? And so what I did is I remember sitting down. I actually just found this notebook because I was reorganizing some old stuff.
Yeah.
And I sat down and this was like a 2-week exercise. What I did is I went back in my life to every idea that I had. Like, I've always been an idea guy.
Yeah.
We're all ideas.
And you journaled them.
Yes.
Yep.
And so that actually, I hadn't really, about 12 years ago, I journaled like from my memory. What I did was that I listed out all these ideas. And of course, you only remember the ideas that were successful.
Right, sure.
Gosh, that was my idea. And so I listed them out. I had about a dozen ideas.
Yeah.
And so then I did research. Remember, this was 2007, 2008. Then I did research to find out, when were they actually commercially viable? When was Facebook IPO? When was whatever successful?
Yeah.
And so what I did, and what I noticed a pattern. I noticed that when I was younger, my ideas, there was about 20 years in between the idea and when it was commercially successful. And what I noticed is that there was a funneling that was happening. That from idea to commercial success, even though it wasn't me, that it was funneling down. And like the last idea that I had actually was like in that 3 to 5 year range.
Interesting.
So it had gone from 20 down to like 3 to 5 years. And I was like, oh man, look at that. This next one, I might be actually on it. And so I really do believe that the most important factor in any startup is time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cool research out there, but timing. If you have the right team, or if you have a team, a product, all this kind of stuff, but if you don't have timing, you're screwed. Yeah. There's no such thing as a hot tub time machine. Right?
That's a great point.
You can't go forward, you can't go backwards. You don't have timing. So the first thing I would say to you, Pat, is that on that question is that I had confidence because I'm an idea guy, and this next idea has got to be the one because, that from a timing perspective. But anyway, sort of kick it off and sort of get into that flow of that with Homebot, there was this really strong conviction around helping a very specific person, the homeowner. We always called her Holly Homeowner. There's something about crystallizing to a persona and then going and talking to Pat, the homeowner, or Nina, the homeowner, or Michael, the homeowner. And actually talking about homeowners and doing the unscalable work of really trying to capture the essence of. And so for me, the Homebot story really starts out with giving a shit about Holly, like really,
right.
And then going out and talking to all these other Hollies And Pat was a good Holly because he was not performing the way I thought Holly or thinking.
Sure.
Holly.
Right.
I'm sure that's all just that's great. He was great.
Yeah.
But I will just say this without sort of belaboring it. Having that sort of like North Star person whose feelings and life and wealth and prosperity you care about, that was and is the North Star of Homebot. No matter all this other stuff, it still is a North Star. It's also the North Star that attracted a lot of millennials. They didn't want to just go do a job. They wanted to be a part of something that was bigger than just the simple sum of the parts.
Right.
And then they were like, oh my gosh, this company actually has a vision to do something for somebody else.
How did you not think the homeowner was being served? What, give us your insight.
Well, specific on it, like I was saying earlier, you had the real estate industry was, again, this is where I was at realtor.com. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much nuanced learnings about the industry. You could see that all the technology was all around buyers transaction, right? All very narrow sort of things. The homeowner in real estate only transacts once every 8 or 10 years. So once they've done their deal with you, the realtor or the lender's done their deal with you, it's like, bye-bye.
Right.
I'll talk to you when you're ready to do a transaction because that's when I get paid. So nurturing and providing value to homeowners takes a long view. And I just saw that wasn't happening. They weren't providing intermediate value.
Yeah. And a lot of this research you did, right, interviewing Pat and everyone else, did you do this before you officially launched Homebot?
That was actually at the launch stage.
Okay.
And the other thing that we did that I felt like was really important was that we didn't start coding anything. We actually drew pictures. And then I would go and have pizzas and beer at dinner tables with folks. I'd pay for the pizza and pay for the beer.
Yeah.
In addition to Pat, I would like run ads in Craigslist and offer Amazon
gift cards
to sit down and give me your thoughts. Look at these 2 pictures. Respond to these pictures. Let's have a conversation.
Interesting.
Really unscalable thing.
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately the genesis of Homebot, I think about it so frequently because I still credit it doing these unscalable things to really capture the sentiment of the person you're trying to help. And then the struggle of scaling a company is to keep your eye on that prize.
Yep.
Because the scale of the company causes you to have to put money and energy into other things. To come back to that thing, Holly, how are we making Holly's life better today? So I think that the more particular nuance is that what we found is that homeowners, they didn't really know that when to buy, when to sell, when to rent, when to remodel, when to refi, and all this. The only time they ever got any help was when somebody had a transaction fee they could earn. And so there was so much intermediate decision-making they needed to make. So for us, sort of getting kicked off that way, Pat, and like maintaining the focus on that North Star was, I think, ultimately what made us successful.
And how would you give us a little bit of the differentiation from a Zillow, for example? A lot. There are definitely similarities, but you captured something different. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there was a really interesting learning there around, there's stuff that you can like read about or you can make assumptions about, but there's nothing like actually talking to people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's hard because all of a sudden you start to formulate, oh, this is the way the world is.
Right.
But if you really want to test it, you need to go sit down with people. You need to talk with people, lots of different people. And so with the Zillow question, what we discovered was that contrary to popular belief, where once people have done a deal with a realtor or a lender, they don't want to see them. Get away from me. You were a necessary evil of a transaction. As it turned out, what we learned was that the homeowners actually wanted more out of them, that they had just consummated a transaction and that they actually wanted more of an advisory relationship, which, again, I think that's contrary to popular belief of these transaction-oriented people. So not only we found that the professionals had more to give, but the clients had more that they wanted out of them, and that there was an opportunity now to provide technology wrapped with humanity and deliver that, whereas Zillow was just a technology. No, nothing against them. It was just a different thing. And today, I would say the what was our North Star around Holly. The how that has made us successful is embracing that professional and really using technology to enable human connection, build trust. And it's worked out great. Turns out these humans are pretty nifty to have. Turns out.
No, again, I've seen the situation where some people think they're the smartest person in the room, right? And their opinion is the only opinion that matters. And as you are launching this, you're considering like, I know what I think, but I have to have these thoughts or claims substantiated by someone else who matters, right? The consumer. So that's pretty impressive that you went along those ways. So you've done the sketches, you're building this thing. So the company's launched as you're interviewing these folks. Or no, not yet. This is all pre.
All we've done is really consolidate our ideas and assumptions into 2 pictures.
Okay.
I literally sat down with Pat, about 199 other people.
Yeah.
2 pictures. And those pictures, we talked about those 2 pictures.
Great.
And turned out one of those pictures was what Homebot is today.
Okay.
The other picture wasn't.
One for the archives.
Yeah. Actually, it's kind of a next phase of Homebot that's finally coming up.
Interesting.
8 years later. But yeah, we hadn't even started Homebot. This was really a grassroots effort to try to say, are we grounded in this? And as we talk about this, I do want to share something that as a technologist, I actually decided I want to go back and get my MBA. And so I'm not like really big on degrees. Like that.
Yeah.
But there was one thing that one professor taught me. There was one thing. I remember one thing from my I kid you not. I remember one thing that one professor said. Now, there was a context of all the other stuff that I was learning.
Sure.
That let this thing kind of sink in.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, you know what he said? He said, there are 3 questions you have to ask yourself as an entrepreneur.
Okay.
Number 1, can you make it? And so with those 2 pieces of paper that we had, it's Homebot. That's like, we had conviction that we could make it because we built technology, right? Can we make it? So going out and talking to people really addressed the second question, which was, if you can make it, you got to move on to the next question is, can you sell it? So selling to the homeowner, it's like, is this a thing of value that you actually right? Even though the homeowners weren't actually paying for it. And then the third question is, after can you make it, can you sell it, is can you make money at it? And you see so many entrepreneurs that get so involved with that. I can make it, I can make it, I can make it, I can make it. And they don't really spend enough time as kind of selling. And then they get, I can make it, I can sell it, I can make it, I can sell it. But then they don't really spend a lot of time saying, oh, I just learned how to sell dollar bills for 50 cents. What a great business. Right? But anyway, that as a part, I'm just, as an overlay process.
Yeah. But that stuck out to you. And logically, my next question is going to be, so you can make it.
Yep.
The you can sell it portion.
Yep.
Was that the next phase of your research to go to those who you thought this would benefit?
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear the commercialization piece.
Yes.
And it's going to probably go in a different direction than I think most people think, which is fascinating. So get us into that. And you were amazing at even being a tech guy, but you have this real estate background. You're a great sales guy. And you need to talk a little bit about your partner here too, right? Who was incredible on the back end to let you go get this out and do what you do. Let's jump into that.
Yeah. So the commercialization is a really fun story. Again, there's some more failure here.
Yeah.
So we're out talking to the Pats and the other homeowners, and it's like, oh wow, they've revealed maybe the how we make money at it part, or how we would sell to real estate agents and lenders. And so since my background was in real estate, I naturally was like, oh, I need to get a bunch of realtors and talk to them and see if they resonate. The same way I was talking to homeowners. That's the commercialization. Who's going to buy this thing?
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll get real estate agents to buy it and I'll give it to their homeowners and everything will be great, right? Repeat referral and all that kind of good stuff. So I got a bunch of realtors in the room. I went to the local MLS, RU Colorado in Denver, and met with the CEO, and a super nice guy, and he loved the story. And he said, I'll get a bunch of realtors in the room for you. And he did. And all the realtors, they all loved it. And I had a bunch of people raise their hand and say, oh, once you build the little piece, this version of this, I want to participate in that experiment. It's like, oh my gosh, this is positive signal. The commercialization is right there within my grasp, right? So anyway, we went down that route. Real estate agents, it dwindled. It actually ended up being just one brokerage. And then we just failed miserably at getting the agents to use this thing.
Yeah.
To load their clients on it. I was like, oh man, false positive. What the heck is going on here? Went back to the local MLS and I said, the other group I'd like to talk to are mortgage lenders. Same thing. I got a bunch of mortgage lenders into a room. I gave my pitch, showed them 2 pieces of paper. Here, actually, now we're starting to build this thing, but show them actually the 1 piece of paper that we're like, oh, this is what the homeowner needs. This is going to be good for the business. Got incredibly positive signal. Everybody wants to participate. And then after the fact, they all started following through. And then all of a sudden, we put this little janky version of this thing together.
Yeah.
And I spent 2 to 5 hours with 15 or 18 different loan officers. We manually added like 15 to 20 clients per, like really hard in the mud kind of stuff. Within the next 60 days, phone rang off the hook. You're like, you're not going to believe this. I just got 2 refis. I just got 5 refis. Oh my gosh, I've already made a bunch of money. I want to load more clients. And it's like, holy Moses, this thing is like, it works. And it's just.
It worked, but could your system support?
Oh no,
okay.
Crappy little. Oh yeah. It was just like,
like Excel forms or something, Google Sheets or.
Yeah. Great point, I think that is also the secret. A part of the secret is we build things that are just clunky and imperfect and ugly. And all you're trying to do is, can I create any value, right? To give me enough hope to go to the next step.
Right.
The next step. And so sure enough, we went to the next step. And really, even from there, from the commercialization path, one of the things that happened was one of those lenders came to me and about 6 months later and took me to the CEO of a company here in town called Universal Lending. I met with the CEO. He's like the godfather of lending in Colorado. Long story short, within the next 3 months, we did a commercial deal with this guy for all of his loan officers.
Wow.
Pete Lansing, amazing guy, so bright. I was like going, oh, we're an enterprise software company. So we're building all this thing to be enterprise. And guess what? Another 6 to 9 months later, we had still only had 1 enterprise customer. So we were failing again. So we actually had to come right all the way back. I said, why are we failing? We didn't have a bunch of companies that were based here in Denver. I said, what was successful?
Right.
All those individual loan officers. So I went back to my co-founder. I said, hey, look, I know I've been asking you to build all this stuff for the enterprise. We got to go back to just selling to individual.
His background engineer as well, or when you say that? Yeah.
I would say he was Ira McMahon. He was the LeBron James, the Steph Curry of the team.
Nice.
Again, just a jazz hand. The point of all that is
he's being very modest.
It's not. This is not a linear experience. Success is non-linear.
Right. Great point.
And so even then, it's like, oh, commercial success. Nope. Take a step back. Oh, commercial success. Nope. Take a step back. And so that was kind of how we got to selling to individual lenders.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, we continue to develop the enterprise part of it, like big companies
sure.
part of it. And now here we are 8 years later, and we're approaching 50-50 now in terms of the enterprise. It's just
it's a good way to diversify. And back to your ability to sit back, think these things through, and then interview those who matter. Did you see that trend when you said, hey, we have 1 enterprise client, but there's these individual users that are making up or most of our customer base? Did you then go interview those individuals to then get the idea of, okay, maybe we do this a little bit differently? Because in some cases, aren't these individuals their own entrepreneurs too? Like they're running their own franchises essentially.
Yeah, I'd like to say that. So first of all, we were obsessed, and I've always been obsessed with our, not just the users, but also our customers. And all the best ideas come from the customers. But I'd like to say that I was omniscient and I was able to detect patterns.
Yeah.
In
pattern recognition, right?
But I wasn't, I would get deep into it. And I guess the point is like, there's all these points of adversity.
Yeah.
Right. We created our own adversity. And then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, adverse moment. What are we going to do? There's no money in the bank. We're running out of money. We got to pivot.
Right.
And we've got to go back to the individual loan officer. But I just feel like that there's so much information and data on understandings. It's like it's right there under your shoe. And we're always looking at it's like the national reams of data. And in fact, there's actually, if you just really do the unscalable and talk to people and like trying to understand how they use it at a real grassroots level.
Yeah.
There's unbelievable insight there.
That's customer feedback is critical. And it is amazing how many companies, once they're rolling, think, again, smartest person in the room. Absolutely. This is how it's going to work. This is my idea. And not interview the customer. But throughout your journey in particular, that's been top of mind for you. And that's been a really key to your success, right? And because if there's a challenge at hand, sometimes it's the saying, it's hard to see the forest from the trees. Sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to take a step back and say, what do we need to refocus on? Or where do we need to push our energy towards? Again, it's impressive that you have that ability to do that. And it's every iteration, every transition point throughout your career and particular Homebot, you're able to see that and then make the appropriate adjustments that then scaled the organization, right?
Yeah, there's a smart guy, I can't remember his name, he always says, he's a VC guy in California, always says, do unscalable things.
Right.
Unscalable things. And there's such a great message in there that when you start to scale a company, you do start to taste success. You're absolutely right. All of a sudden, you become the smartest person in the room. And that's the curse. That is absolutely the curse because all you got to do is get out of your office and go spend some time with customers. I used to do this at the beginning of Homebot. When I'd go to a conference, I'd call a customer and I'd go say, hey, do you mind if I buy your whole office lunch? And I spend the day at your office. And I literally spend 4 hours in someone's office just to see how they're doing stuff. And everybody, all of our employees back in Denver, they rued the day that I came back from those because I'd come, this is all wrong. They need this and this. And we're focused on the wrong things. Stay connected. But again, it's just one of those things that your success causes you to say, oh, we can only do big scalable things. And I think we've done a fairly good job coming back to that.
Yeah. And you wouldn't have had that belief if you didn't fail, right? If you were just uber successful throughout your entire journey, then I think you'd be drinking your own Kool-Aid, right? You would think, yeah, I know everything. I'm the smartest person. And what you find in some other organizations is when you have people that know nothing but success, again, maybe at a small scale, it snowballs into something and then they eventually leads to failure. And would you say that, again, being at the top of the mountain at the bottom, that also taught you to say to yourself, look, you're true to who you are, and that, hey, sometimes I don't know everything and I need to go out and get educated?
Yeah, actually, there's you saw the rocket booster, the SpaceX that just blew up.
Yeah.
There's actually a cool documentary about SpaceX and how creating rockets and all that, and it's a totally different approach to failure, fail fast. We all hear about it, but I guess the point is that everything has changed when it comes to innovation development. It's not about sitting in a room and trying to design the perfect thing. That's what NASA did. And it cost billions of dollars, and ultimately it failed because it wasn't good enough at innovating. Now, the way to innovate is you do the minimal, you put it out there, the failure, and then you're watching the failure. We're talking about it's like being so honest with yourself. It's like what failed, why did it fail, and then you go back into
and not pointing fingers either, right?
That you're anticipating failure. You're not scared of failure. You're leaning into failure. You're learning from that failure, and then you're retooling to the next. And I think that again, I always am scared that I come off as Pollyannish because I would never wish failure on anybody. But I also, there's no such thing as success without failure. You don't learn. You're not learning. It's impossible to learn if you're not failing. And like when you look at it's like even like with some of these companies are like LeBron James went straight from high school to the NBA. It's such an artificial expectation. As a CEO, I look out and I go, when it was time for me to step down, because I'm like, okay, I'm looking at my failures as a CEO.
Yeah.
I've reached the end of my useful life as a CEO. And it's time for me to let somebody else come in and take it from me.
I do want to explore that a little bit later, but back to the journey at hand. So you're testing things, it's breaking. Tell me the day you made positive revenue, right? Was that short-lived? Did it go negative? Was it back and forth between, hey, some months we weren't making any money and there's red in the account versus black? So
yeah, leading up to it, I had saved money. And so I was ready to go deep on it. But I will just say, so we got our first check and it's like, okay. And then there's a lot of setbacks. And I thought that I was going to be good at fundraising because I have jazz hands.
Right.
And I was terrible. I got turned down 150 times from all the top VCs. It was really brutal. That's 150 failures. I was so invested in every single one of those meetings.
Let me jump in on that a little bit. So tell us a little bit more about that. Raising money is brutal. Did these VCs, in your opinion, not see what you guys were doing? Or was it because you didn't see where the market needed to go? Let's get into that a little bit.
I think there's a lot of different things. I think one in particular, actually, I think there was some ageism because I was an older entrepreneur. Like going, oh, this guy's going to take the first money that comes his way in terms of selling out. which there is some truth to that, right? I'm not willing to lose it all. So I think that, though, on the VC, here's what I would say. In retrospect, for entrepreneurs, I think about all the time that I spent trying to raise money. And all I can think about is, I wish I had that time back. Because I would have been much better served to pour that time in doing unscalable things and unscalable experiments and talking to customers and learning about ways to actually make revenue than trying to going, oh, I can't be successful without raising $1 million, $2 million. And I'm not saying I'm a bootstrapper.
Yeah.
I'm not like a lifer money raise guy.
Right.
But when I think about the thousands of hours that I spent pitching and trying to raise money, and I go, okay, what was the return on that versus what's the return on 1,000 hours of spending time at a dinner table listening to real people and real people problems and then figuring out how to solve these problems? There's no comparison. And you know what happens? When you focus on solving problems, the money finds you. It does find you. Yeah. And when you get to number 50 of failure, then I get thirsty and I'm trying to oversell. And now there's blood in the water and they can smell it, they can taste it. And now I am my own worst enemy in these meetings.
Right.
And that was my biggest lesson from a fundraising perspective is so many entrepreneurs think it's about raising money. It's like, well, no, it's about building a company that solves somebody's problem, right? So you got to go sell it. And if you can't sell something for $5, you certainly can't sell something for $5.
Right.
Yeah. Go sell something. If you can't sell it, then you got the wrong idea or you get the wrong timing.
Yeah. In retrospect, was that a good thing that you didn't get the initial funding?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would have been, we got offers for funding, but they said, okay, we're going to give you 4 times as much as you're asking for, but we want you to change your business model and think differently. And I said, no, I can't do that. And, but I think, so I never really got it. And then there were a couple of VCs that believed in me. And then there was a big strategic corporate customer that came in and ended up giving us a big chunk of cash.
Interesting.
To do the deal. But again, the money found us. I didn't go, it wasn't seeking it because we were having.
It was the right time too.
So this is important, Ernie, and I'm gonna, you're a contrarian thinker in a good way. When you did that deal, Black Knight, I don't think there's any secret about that. A huge public company that owns sort of all the data, mortgage information, all the stuff that you can, that's them, right? And they did a Series A round, fairly substantial. But the main thing I remember sitting down, we were talking, you had this group, this VC, et cetera. And you go, look, the bottom line is I needed the commercial data that they had. And you did sort of a strategic deal with them, which was huge because it wasn't the highest valuation. It wasn't even close. And without them, there kind of is no Homebot today, right? So,
oh yeah, they were absolutely an integral part of the process.
And by the way, when was that? What year was that?
Is it 16, 17, 18, maybe 2018? I think so.
So 3 years into the company's existence.
Oh yeah. And actually, let's see here, 15, 16, 17, maybe it was 2017.
Okay.
2017. So a couple of years in.
Sure.
I'd spent a year trying to raise funds, and it was finally at the end of that year. Right. Think about it, a year raising. And so, but I'll go back to this. So first of all, I'm super grateful for them to be able to see that. And their dollars, we absolutely were able to go to the next level with them. But as an entrepreneurial advice, I really do feel so strongly about make $5 before you make $5 million, and the money will find you.
Yeah.
They're pretty sophisticated at finding, right? Finding you. So.
In fact, it's some people's jobs to find those type of organizations, right?
That's right.
This is important. Ernie, I want to talk a little bit about that, though. And ultimately, you did raise money. You did do the deal with Black Knight. There was some complexity to it. You are a very proficient deal maker. And I wouldn't categorize, again, I'm primarily in the business of working with people and making deals and being their advisor. And I don't think there's a lot of folks outside of the Goldman Sachs's and kind of a different stratosphere that are entrepreneurs, in my opinion, that are great deal makers. You've hit on a lot of key things and what you're not just an entrepreneur, you're not just a guy with vision. You walk a very fine line. You are not afraid to say no, not from a position of arrogance, you're very good at kind of getting to the best deal. And I want to get into that because I saw you do it. And it's really easy to take the money. You're under stress. You're hiring staff. You've got to pay the bills. Talk us about that fine line, because you're one of those guys that you don't sell out when it's easy to do. And ultimately, I think that was the difference between having an okay exit, for example, to a tremendous exit.
It's a great question. I think there's two parts to it. I think there's number one, that it is about confidence and real confidence. So you're focused on building a real business, and that the business is going to work with or without the deal. That the business does not get value. The business does not come down to one deal, make or break.
Right.
And I think this is the way you build your business. You got to build it durably, makes money, money-making business, right? So I think the confidence that goes around really spending your energy building a durable business, I think it's part A. Part B is there is some psychology to it. And for me, the psychology is signal. I call it closed signaling. So Brian, if you and I were negotiating over me selling you a pencil, I asked you, I said, hey, it's $5. You say, will you take 50? I say, sure. You say, will you take 4? And you say, and I say, sure. You say, like 350. Sure. Yes. I'm not signaling to him it's time to close.
Right.
If I don't start pushing back on him, why would he stop asking for things? There's no reason for him to stop. So I do believe that there's a signaling there. I don't think it's that shrewd. I just think it's who we are. It's like, why would he close if he keeps on getting everything that he asked for? And so if I want to close the deal with him, I'm going to say 350. He's going to say, we take 3. No, 350 or I walk. And so now if he wants to close, he will close. Otherwise, he's in a perpetual loop. And I really do think that understanding that psychology is one thing, but having confidence in your business, those two things have to work together, because you know how that works. You get into a situation, you're like, well, oh, the market's changed. I'm running out of cash. I got to go raise more money. Now, before you go raise more money, actually, you need to cut your burn.
Right.
You've got to take care of what you got. That's the power that you have to cut your burn, because the more you cut your burn, the less vulnerable you are to someone who wants to come over and put a bunch of money into you and take ownership of your company on the cheap.
Right.
So one of the things that I've learned from you, and you've given me advice on certain of my own business things. One time it was a real estate investment. I knew your acumen on everything, and I was kind of running by you. Here, I feel like the market's changing. This is a lot of cash, but this and that and the other. One of the things that you said that's impactful is I don't think it was if you're not 100% sure, because we're never 100% sure. But the theme of what you said was, if you're not sure or certain or thereabouts or close to, always say no. Always say no.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a lawyer. And so by nature, even though I'm kind of a risk taker, I think a lot of times when I'm advising clients, they go, because when you're doing these transactions, you're as much advisor as legal and et cetera, if you're proficient at what you're doing. And one of the things that I think you and other entrepreneurs that I've known and have been very successful is you go, you're willing to say no. I think we're hearing that. You are very much willing to say no and to be reasonable about it. But there was a bottom line that you were willing to say, I'm not taking that and I will walk. And by the way, you weren't just throwing that out there, some sort of Machiavellian tactic. You believed it.
Right.
You said, this is it.
The best stories are true.
There's an energy.
The best bluffs are real bluffs.
Right.
There's an energy to the other side. You know this when you get to a point in that deal.
Right.
You get to that point that actually makes it happen. Give us your mindset, because that, again, I think you made some really tactical decisions, whether it be raising money. And I know at the end that you took some risks and they paid off, right?
Yeah, but you remember we were talking about earlier about knowing your own worth, individual employee. You got to know your worth as a company or as a strategic partner. And so there's the bright side of that. There's a responsibility of saying you need to know what your worth is, right? And so when I say you have to be certain, you have to know. You have to do the research. You got to dig in. You got to be honest with yourself to know what your individual worth is. You got to know what your company worth is. And and to create that certainty in your mind what that is. The dark side of that is that we entrepreneurs tend to be a little bit optimistic about it.
Right.
So that's where you have to temper that down to the extent that you can, because when you go into negotiations, if you don't have a strong sense of your worth, you're either just bullshitting your way to the finish line, or it's a smash and grab. You're just trying to do maximization of price, right? He's like, I don't really care about fair value exchange. I just want to do maximum extraction of the party on the other side.
Yep.
And by the way, I know that people do well playing those games and whatever, and I don't have any judgment on that. I'm just saying, for me as an entrepreneur, the best asset going into those negotiations is actually to really have a pretty empirical sense of your worth.
Yeah.
And by the way, it goes back to, if you don't, why would they?
Right.
So,
you're a very values-driven person, and that matters. And your values have never just been about money. This gets back to, again, in my opinion, one of the best things that could have happened were these failures, because you were looking at it going, I've seen bigger things than this, right? I couldn't pay my Amex bill. I was sleeping. And you're very transparent and willing to have open and honest, although sometimes difficult conversations, which I think is the best way oftentimes to formalize these kind of deals and really get people behind you. Fair?
Yeah, and you got to do it before you ever get into the deal.
Yeah.
You got to have advisors that show you straight. Because remember, once you take responsibility, it's not that you have to individually go fishing for all this stuff, but you need to surround yourself with people that will give you the hard truths about stuff. Like, here's the hard truth about enterprise value on SaaS companies, right?
Yeah.
Here's the hard truth about non-competes. Here's the hard truth. And they're saying that's where sort of having friends that are actually really good at their craft, whether it's investment bankers or attorneys or just mentors that will speak the truth to you, that kind of stuff. And then your ability to listen to that truth and process and connect all those dots, so that if you're trying to learn that when you're in the trenches of a deal, that's not the right time.
Yeah.
You can, by the way, when the deal fails, you can learn.
Right.
Sure.
You learn a lot in those cases. Yeah. So this is a great, you ultimately commercialized Homebot in a quick amount of time, but that was never your end goal. I think you were prepared to ride this out for a while to make it work, right?
Yeah.
You got traction. You started to take off. You started seeing the numbers that would justify a pretty high enterprise value.
Mm-hmm.
Take us through kind of that process. This all went down, by the way, when COVID took off. And it was at the point in COVID where we were all sort of, the world is ending, even though I think commercially we all made it out of that pretty quickly. But you're in the middle of something at that time, and you had a bet the company. Do I do it? Do I not? Let's hear your story, because it's pretty fascinating.
The first thing I'll say is that I never wanted to run out of money.
Yeah.
And we were having success. And when the marketing people said, I want to spend more money on this, I'd say no. I want to spend more money on that, I'd say no. And we were really maniacal about ROI on where we would spend the money, and tracking it. But we brought another guy, Michael, who was our COO, who had also been a part of failed startups and running out of money. And so he was amazing about being maniacal about, we always had doomsday. We were always doing doomsday planning. And doomsday, like low water mark of money in the bank, right? And so that, in combination with my bootstrapping mentality, really caused me to be very conservative about spending money. And something happened in the fall of 2019 before COVID. We missed our numbers, our own self-budgeted numbers, poorly. And I was going, why did we miss those numbers so bad? Oh, it was a confluence of interest rates and the market and the selling season, blah, 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 blah. Wow. Yeah, I really had a blind spot. It was there. It was all there to be read, but I didn't read it. What are we going to do now that we're in the middle of this environment? So we can spend some more on marketing. So I said, okay, I'll let you spend the $50,000 or $25,000 or whatever it is. We spent the money and we 10x'd it. I went, oh my God. And you know what, I don't think I've even shared this part of it. I remember in the fall of 2019, because it happened in July, August, where it was that we missed our numbers. And all of a sudden we ran the marketing. And I was like, I am officially a liability. My conservatism and our growth right now is being constrained by me, because we had the money. we just 10x'd 25 to 250.
Right.
It was a 250 payback on the 25 spent. I was like, oh my gosh, because I didn't want to spend any more because I'm so protected.
Sure.
A little watermark of cash in the bank, and I
Yeah.
don't want to do outlays. And that was the moment where I went, maybe we've reached a scale now, because the opportunity in the market was to actually take market share and to let go before competitors came along.
Right.
But that was a tough moment for me, because I was like, oh.
But there's probably this internal conflict, because yeah, you're right. You're holding yourself back from that growth, but there's also the law of diminishing returns too when it comes to marketing, right? More coins you put in the machine doesn't always equate to, more prizes. So I'm sure you were balancing, you and your partner that had this experience before, right? Or
actually, I think it was unbalanced. I think
interesting.
I was way conservative.
Okay.
Matter of fact, so conservative. I look back on that and I said, geez, I should have raised another $10 million and really gone after this a little harder. But that's not my DNA.
Yeah.
But that was the moment where I was like, wow, we got a good thing going. Maybe it's time to bring other people in that have more acumen or whatever.
Sure.
Next level. I realized that I was scared. I didn't want to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. We had a successful business, and I was scared. And I was actually more scared than I was willing to admit.
So at that point, were you almost thinking, geez, I could now doubt is right inserted in your mind? Or are you thinking, hey, I might actually push this thing in reverse, and I got to be careful? Yeah.
And that's actually that. So that was the beginning of, and then of course there were VCs that were already calling us.
Yeah.
Money funds you.
Yep.
That was the thing I loved. All these VCs were calling, even the guys.
Well, that had to be a fun conversation to have, right?
Actually, I did to them.
Yeah.
On Tuesday. Oh, wait a minute. I can't do it on Tuesday. How about Friday? Oh, wait a minute.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Jerked around by.
Yeah, absolutely.
We know your name. We know who you are.
Right.
But anyway, there was this whole thing. VCs were trying to put money into us, and that kind of caused me to go, wow, I'm in over my head on this. I'm not a professional money raiser.
Right.
When I tried to raise a seed round, I was really failed. Even though I got a strategic eventually, I wasn't very good at that. So again, that's where I came back to advisors, and I hired an investment banker, and I told the investment banker, I said, hey, look, I'm not committed to one way or the other, but I want you to explore this thing and see what happens. And then, as Pat had mentioned earlier, we found a great private equity firm. I always joke, I think it was like at the time, it was the only private equity firm that weren't douchebags.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. And we ended up, our deal was scheduled to close the week that COVID shutdown hit. It was crazy. But going back to our original theme, I sat there on the couch, if you will, with the partner of the PE firm watching this horror movie for both of us unfold. And ultimately,
this being kind of
COVID, right?
Yeah.
And you know what ultimately happened in April is I called him up and I said, I'm shutting the deal down because I'm still running a business over here. And now this is a distraction.
Interesting.
I got confidence in my business.
Yep.
I know I got enough money in the bank to weather a big storm.
Right.
We've already done contingency planning. And honestly, it was me stepping over saying, it's time to officially part ways on this. And we can get back together at a future time, but I don't need this distraction.
So was there something, I know this has been a great relationship.
Yes.
But was there something at that time, though, that you said, hey, time out? What was it? A valuation issue? Was it a clawback issue? Was it you changed your mind? What was going on?
No, it was like, so we had already reached all of our terms.
Okay.
It was a fair value exchange. It was perfect. And I like these guys. And it was all good. And then all of a sudden, when the lockdown happened, they were like, hey, we can't close yet. We're just going to do wait and see. And so I got into a mode with them of wait and see. And then a month went by. And then I guess a second. So that was March. So April went by. And then 6 weeks. So remember, this was only 6 weeks into it.
Yeah.
I said, I'm killing the deal. Now, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are saying, I'm going to do whatever it takes.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's the time that they might be vulnerable because they've got their hopes up and it's hard to go back down from there. Right. But again, going back to the theme of you've never gotten too high or too low, you've just been thoughtful, right? And stayed the course.
Confident in my business because we have built it to the contingency plan to be able to take on a storm. I don't know if we were prepared to go the full COVID.
Sure.
But as it turned out, we were, right? Because the way interest rates and all that worked out. But the second part of that was the close signal, which was I have confidence in my value. I'm stepping away from this right now.
Yeah.
And it's not a bluff. Look into my eyes. I'm serious.
Right.
I've got a business to run. By the way, my business is doing better. I've already seen early signals.
Right.
So I'm ready to walk. And he's like, no, we're going to close. And we closed a month later.
Interesting.
And
Awesome.
by the way, it has been a marvelous relationship.
So at that time, right, knowing what we know that a lot more people were getting into home ownership, right? They were getting out of the cities. They wanted, because everybody was on lockdown, they wanted their own homes. Those who didn't take vacations, right, that had homes were like, now what do I do on my next project? So maybe I'll take some equity out of my house and then put it toward. So those little things, did you see that coming? Because that probably benefited your organization, didn't it?
Yeah, but the biggest thing was when the Fed responds with lowering rates.
Right.
It's a stimulus on the economy. And then you've got all these other things with COVID, like you were saying, and moving and buying a home because you don't want to be in a rental unit,
right,
in a high rise. There was a conflict.
It's like this perfect storm.
And the truth is that had I killed the deal and did a deal another year later, it would have been a much richer deal.
Right.
Because our business but pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered.
Yes.
It was a fair deal going into it. And to their credit, there was no retrade. It was the deal that we had negotiated. And I was not going to do a retrade either. Because it's like, if you want to retrade, you can retrade, but we're going to have to see you again in about a year.
So this has really worked out well. And I think with private equity, it can.
Yeah.
If there's two truths about it though, not every group is the same, right? There's that. And secondly, it's like a partnership. You don't typically just sell in these kinds of deals. You'll make out very well. You did, but you had a lot of skin going forward too. There was a partnership. You were doing new stuff. You still had the ability to make out on the back end. Talk a little bit about, it wasn't your only opportunity. What was it about them that made this a great relationship and that allowed you to they didn't retrade? Let's step into your shoes a little bit there.
Yeah. So I think that the mechanics at a fundraising level, so I was like, oh, geez, if we did a big A round, I got all these VCs who want to give me a bunch of money for an A round. I'm probably going to me and my founder are going to get diluted to where we don't control.
Right.
And so that was actually like, well, if I don't control them, I might as well sell the whole thing. Right.
Right.
And so that was kind of the thought process in terms of, so then once you get into let's sell the whole thing, then it became a situation of, but it's got to be the right buyer, because even if I'm out of the business, I have a culture of friends and people I don't want to sick them to the wolves,
right,
and make their lives miserable and that sort of thing. So for us, it was very personal, and to meet people that we trusted and that cared about culture. And that was a dicey process, because I remember meeting these guys. I'm like, oh my God, perfect. And I go, oof, they must be really good at selling. They'll look good.
Right.
About how people oriented they are. And as it turns out, they were being honest and transparent about their people first, and they cared about people. And I guess the other part of that too, Pat, was that that they asked me, what do you want to do? And it wasn't just fait accompli that they were going to rip me out and replace me with a smarter, younger version, right? It was, what do you want to do? And I said, I actually want to stay with business. I'm having fun.
Yeah.
But I would like more people that are smarter than me to help with making marketing decisions and yield management decisions. They're like, okay, let's get some people on your bench. And they followed through with all that. They actually just supported me and let me make some really...
They were a supportive partner versus a dictator, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that really worked for us. We basically we tripled the business, and we quadrupled the business in 36 months. We tripled the business in 24 months.
That's incredible.
It was a partnership that way. And it was it really worked out.
It's interesting, right? Because in venture capital and private equity, you're going to have some good apples and some bad apples. And it really, not many know that when you align and money's being exchanged for a percentage of ownership, there's a partnership. You're in bed together, and you got to make sure you have the right partner in place. Did you have a chance to, as you're vetting them, to ensure, right, this isn't fool's gold, this is actual gold itself? Were you interviewing other portfolio companies of theirs and leaders and everything else? Great.
And even then, that works. It's all the referral.
Right. Right.
But I think ultimately it came back to me and my co-founder and our COO, and we're in a room and we're asking questions.
Yeah.
That they're very thoughtful questions to try to determine transparency. We don't necessarily care about the answer. We care about the transparency.
Yeah.
We trust these guys. Actually, that's the way we developed a cool little thing too, just in hiring employees, to where we're asking questions. And the questions I would ask as CEO, I'd always ask questions, 3 different questions that were kind of interesting questions.
Mm-hmm.
People would get really fixated on the answer.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't care about the answer. I cared about the honesty. I cared about the transparency.
That's great.
And so we played that game with them. But again, they're really smart. So we were like, oh, geez, are we in 4-dimensional chess?
Right.
At the end of the day, it was like, okay, what's our gut? And our gut was, these guys are legit. They're honest. And I could see us partnering with these guys.
Yeah.
But you're not always, who knows, right?
Sure.
But in our case, we really focus on that part. And I think that these guys probably get a lot of deals cheaper than they would otherwise, because that's a part of the deal. They say, like, with wealth, it's not just about money, it's about having.
Right.
But it's partnerships too. We probably could have yield managed with other folks.
Yeah.
But these guys, but when you look at it in a bigger context over time, especially with profit interest and there is carried interest. We did profit, all that kind of jazz. As an entrepreneur, you have to look into the future state. You say, whoa, what happens if this thing is successful?
Right.
I want to jump in on that. You made a great decision. If you're an entrepreneur looking to exit, you want to listen closely to this piece. Earnouts are a big thing.
More now than ever.
It's more now than ever, but it's a great deal for a buyer if they can get it. And one of the things you were very astute on, and I'm not suggesting that came up in the deal that you did, but in vetting what you were doing, you put a stake in the ground very early and said, look, I want a piece of the upside if it's there, because you recognized your limitations and what they could bring, which could be a very powerful thing in private equity if the partnership is going to work. But what you were smart enough to look at were things like profits interest, for example, which is not, hey, the price is going to go down on me like an earnout potentially. You wanted a certain amount of cash to make out, and you knew you were going to be okay. And you solidified that. And then you took a small piece in the form of a profits interest, which is relatively low risk, and this thing is played out. And generally speaking, I think that profits interest it could be worth more when this either goes public or whatever your exit's going to be, right? Is that sort of the generally on point?
It's the kind of the wow of all this. I will kind of sort of deflate your perception of my intuition there a little bit, insofar as it started that way. But when you get into the muck of fair value exchange, enterprise value, and all the other terms, when I look back at the transaction, I say, what did I do wrong? And what I think I did wrong, even though I started out in a sort of a good mindset of future state, I got really wrapped up in the fair value exchange of the now. And then I looked at that future state and I said, the cherry on top. Let the upside take care of itself. Let the upside take care of itself. If I could go back and tell the version of myself at the time, I'd say, you know what? You need to put 1% more time into that part. Because if this thing is successful the way you think it's going to be successful, you really need to negotiate that piece.
Yeah.
And I think that I almost exclusively indexed my time and energy to the fair value exchange and under indexed to that as to the future state. Of course, that's easy for me to say now because I'm like,
absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Right. Yeah.
But I just think that if I'm advising other entrepreneurs, I'd say, hey, look, if you are getting into a partnership, maybe you should think about what if it actually, not that, oh, shoot, I got out of this.
Right.
No more downside risk. Actually, you do have downside risk, which is it doesn't map out the way in the future. Because don't you want them to be successful? Do you just want to sell them a bill of goods? Do you want to sell them an inverted hockey stick? No. You want them to be successful.
Right.
And if you're along for the ride, it's not just a cherry on top. You want to be along for the ride.
Right.
Right.
And it's also you're a vested partner to them too. They want it to be successful. They don't want you just to kind of be like, hey, I got my money, I'm out. I have no more interest, or I'm just going to be traveling and not really present.
Yeah, I think when I think about why I did that, and so as I've mentored, advised, or just talking to friends that are selling too, that little sort of kernel of wisdom, I think, is that I was talking to someone that closed something about a year ago, and he called me up and he's like, oh, this is just miserable. They want more docs or more identification or more set aside. And he was just, it's just so brutal to be in the deal. And I remember saying to him, I go, dude, you need to be waking up early and going to bed late. If you think about the last 5-6 years of your business and the price per hour that you've been earning right now, today through closing, you are going to make 10x per hour you put into this right now. So get over your fatigue, get over it, get over it, get over it.
Yep.
Wake up. You got to wake up right now, right? You need adrenaline, not fatigue. You got to overcome that, because you need to be reading these docs. You need to be listening to your advisors. You need to be leaning in, not leaning back, because the last thing you want to do is get lazy on any of this right now. Be involved, right? Because your income per hour is the greatest it'll ever be in your entire life.
You hit on something huge, Ernie, and this gets back to your deal acumen. Part of your overall success, it was the whole package, but this was a big part of it. Okay. Let's call it the balls and everything else that you were willing to demonstrate. And you said something that's a universal truth, right? Which is the end of the deal is the hardest. And the end of the deal is always where there's still a ton of money moving around. You might have agreed to it on paper or whatever, but when you get into all of those different mechanics and looking at your profits interest, and I'm like, do I have the profits interest correct relative to everything else? Part of why I know you were successful in the deal process is you brought that intensity, and you can't have fatigue at the 5-yard line, because the 5-yard line is actually where it's the hardest, right? So that is that not the truth?
You're in the red zone.
Yes.
You don't see a lot of Hall of Famers that weren't incredibly proficient in the red zone.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's so hard though, because again, as an entrepreneur, you've been doing this for 5, 8, 18 years. The reason a lot of times you're selling is because you are tired. You do need to,
right.
You are fatigued.
Yeah.
You are stressed. You are. And for me anyway, I was actually a lot more stressed, tired, and fatigued than I was even giving myself credit for, because that's what you do. You just like going, okay, I can sleep when I'm dead, whatever, leading up to that point. But when you do get in that deal, something happens. There's a malaise that starts to come over you that I think that's the moment where I just say, wake up. It's go time.
Right.
Because that's where you're making you're making $10,000 an hour, not $10 an hour in those last 30 days.
Now, was this transaction, was it 100% or was it over 50, just below 100, over 51% that you were?
It was 100%, but as Pat was saying, there was
right. Right. And so take me now, as we're talking through this journey, check is cut. It's in your bank account. What's that feeling? Do you take a minute? Do you get emotional? Because it's been a hell of a journey. What are you feeling at this point when actually the check clears?
So all I want to do is call my dad, so I'd be proud.
Yeah.
So that was the first. He just passed a couple months ago. So that's I should have said that, because now I'm getting all weepy. Yeah. But that was the very first thing that hit me.
Yeah.
I will never forget though. I'm 55. My co-founder is now 35. Keep in mind, 10 years ago, I was 45. He was
25. Yeah.
Ira's that young.
That's
great. Good for you, Ira. You are the man.
Good for Ernie with those jeans he's got there. Look at him. He looks young.
I remember though, when I called him, and because I wanted to hear
you want to hear his reaction.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do you feel? What do you think?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget what he said. And I'm going to botch. Exactly. But he said, it's amazing, because I will never have to work on a project that I don't love for the rest of my life. I went, that's what you're thinking? But that's because he's a creator.
Absolutely.
He's a builder.
Absolutely.
He's an artist.
Yeah.
And he doesn't see his life not working.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
For him to say, I get the privilege.
Right.
I'm only working on shit that I love and care about. I was like going, oh wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a huge deal. So that was inside our head at the moment.
Did you give yourself permission to do some of the things that you weren't able to do in the past, like home ownership that you brought up earlier?
Yeah.
Uh,
right?
That became instantly a priority. priority for me.
Yeah.
It's been 3 years since the deal.
Yeah.
And I do remember thinking to myself, I'm going to take my dad to the Masters.
Yeah.
And spend a ridiculous amount of money doing the VIP treatment.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm so happy that I did that.
Yeah.
What I have discovered, though, is that I'm a doer, I'm an earner, and now that's part of me. And so I struggle finding the balance, right?
Let me get the victory was short-lived for you, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I was
but that's
CEO
yeah.
for a couple of years.
Okay.
Through the whole COVID, COVID.
Yeah.
And I loved that challenge.
Yeah.
And now I had great support, so I got to breathe.
And you were learning, right? You had new partners that were adding value. So you felt like you were still building, you were still learning, and you were having fun, right?
I think the biggest challenge for me has been the last 14 months.
Yeah.
Where I step out of CEO role and I'm like going,
yeah,
okay, I'm remodeling this house.
Right.
What's going on?
So talk about that though. What was the moment, your CEO, co-founder, that you said, you know what, I'm going to transition out? Was it something that, you had inserted this thought, right? You said back in 2019, fall of 2019, due to what you were doing with marketing, right? So there's a little bit of that in there. At what point do you make that decision?
Yeah, so now we're 2 years later, fall of 2020 or 2021.
Okay.
And it was less about me and it was more about the guy I was mentoring.
Okay.
And I actually don't remember the specific moment, but I remember or what it was tactically or whatever. I just remember the feeling. One day I was like, this guy's got it. This guy's like, oh, that's the kind of energy I used to have, right? And he's much smarter than me. So
what role was he in at that time?
He was our chief revenue officer.
Okay.
And he was like killing it.
Yeah.
And just as I watched his approach to solving problems and stuff like that, and I just remember it's very different from me, personality-wise.
Yeah.
Which I think is a struggle, like, just in general, culturally.
Do you have jazz hands though?
No, he doesn't.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
He doesn't. No, but he bled Homebot Pink.
Yeah.
I could tell he was a good guy.
Yeah.
He really cared about the mission.
Yeah.
And it was more about me saying, I just remember going, I think it was a meeting where I just walked out of the meeting and went, wow, man, he's got it. He's got it. And then all of a sudden that gave me permission to start thinking about maybe it's time. So then I called before I even spoke to him, I called the partners at the PE, and I was just like, hey, I'm starting to think this way. How might that look? And then they were super supportive of all of it. And it's been,
that's awesome.
It hasn't been linear, but it's definitely been very positive.
So tell us, I remember you saying long before this turned out the way it was probably a dream, but you said, hey, I want to do this and then I want to do it again and I want to do it again. And what I think is also cool about you is that you've always kind of recognized the shelf life. This wasn't all about Ernie at the end of the day. It was about other people and all that, but you were willing to, you ran it like hell. You wanted to do all the things that I think most of us dream about doing, but you kind of went, there's more to my life. I know you got remarried to Christy, who is amazing. You're doing these incredibly cool and fun things. I always get jealous. I'm sitting here billing hours and I got to look at how you're like taking Lear jets here and there and whatever the case is, but you've earned it 1,000%. And then secondly, you told me you kind of are looking at some other stuff on the business front. So what's going on?
I've always called myself the Grim Reaper of ideas. I am so hard on myself. I come up with an idea and then I'll spend 6 months figuring out why it's not going to work. Just
poke holes in it.
So it's so hard to make things work. And I think, and when I mentor entrepreneurs, who are at the idea stage, I tell them, I go, I'm the Grim Reaper. I'm going to try to kill this in the ground because your energy and passion is so valuable. You don't want to waste the resources around something that is probably not going to work. So I've been doing the same with my ideas. So I've been ebbing and flowing. I'm like, I got an idea. The cool truth of it is right now is that there are some other things at Homebot that I'm going to start leaning in on just to help Charlie, our CEO. Yeah. And it's like, and I feel really passionate about it. Not a new gig. Actually, I'm still attracted to helping my old gig do the next thing and do the next thing.
But you're turning into the R&D department. Is that what I'm hearing? Oh, no.
But I'm definitely a vocal advisor.
Sure.
to the process. I care a lot about people, obviously, still, and everybody wants to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. And I just want to make sure that Homebot continues to be bigger than the simple sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And so I'm leaning back into that right now. I'm not taking a leadership role or anything like that,
Right.
like a special project kind of thing. And just because I believe in the people and the mission but I think ultimately I'm always going to be the idea guy. I'm not so sure how active I will be individually in pursuing it, just because now I go, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's more work than most first-time entrepreneurs have any clue about. They really don't.
Yeah.
So that's my job as a mentor, is to scare the hell out of them.
Yeah.
To make sure they are in it to win it.
And this has been your baby, right? And you want to see it continue to grow. There's also probably, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that element of you can't turn it off. You've been doing it for years, right? There's stages. Sure, you might have kind of taken the break, celebrated a bit, but now you're like, I'm ready to get back in the game. Like, that was great, right? But I'm ready to go. Is there some truth to that?
Just to come full circle
with
this entire conversation. Remember I said that we drew 2 pictures?
Yes.
And remember I said we talked to all these people. Homebot was the first picture. In the back of our mind, we always talked about that a year in, 2 years in, 3 years in, that we would actually come back to the second piece of paper. Never in our wildest dreams would we guess that we would be 8 years into the Homebot journey and not come back to the second piece of paper.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing right now.
Let me guess, second piece of paper.
That's awesome.
It's time. Piece of paper.
That's exciting.
That's great.
So,
that's exciting.
But it's so crazy though. And I think that it's like, never would we have ever guessed it would take the first piece of paper was so deep that it would take 8 years for us to pull that other thing out. And put that.
What I think what's really gratifying to see, and I've had a couple Ernie experiences, but on the whole, in terms of the friendship and the whole picture, right? It's really gratifying to think back of those conversations on the couch where you had everything against you and at Starbucks, and you're talking about these grassroots kind of things. And now every realtor out there, every mortgage lender, I've probably got 10 of them, right? I get these, where's my house? What's my house value today, right? Or the worst is you see the value of the place you never should have sold, right? We all have that. We all have that one as well. And it's pretty cool. Yeah, right.
The auto center.
We've all got to have at least one real estate mistake, right? But it's really cool to see, and I don't know exactly what's going on at the company. I can tell there's really big things happening, and there's a huge buzz, and it's incredible, man. It's truly like a once in a lifetime type story.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Excellent. Ernie, we'll end it there. I think it's been a heck of a story. It's been one I appreciate you coming on and sharing, because really this is also the basis of why Pat and I started this podcast. We wanted to learn, and not just the success, right? But the failures, how you scaled it, what your line of thought was, everything in between that story. And to see someone like yourself, who's always been, you're the same guy, right? From at least when I met you and we're sitting down in these restaurants. Pat's known you longer, but you're the same guy, and you like to see good people succeed and win in life. And it's an impressive story. And so thank you for coming on and sharing that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. This was awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Ernie Graham, everybody.